Welcome back to the Sinner's Sonnets, written and read by Giles Mirth. Part 3, Wrath and Pride. King's house is now the site of his failing. He's in the main room where all was corrupt, leaning over the second-floor railing next to the oak stairs with descent abrupt. Looking to King from beneath scowling brows, Lynn emerges from her bedroom glaring. Increasingly there have been endless rows, silence interspersed with bouts of swearing. As she passes him, King emits a snort. A thong and knee socks is all she's wearing. Obscenities are her only retort. His crude temper is suddenly flaring. On your reasonable judgment wrath feasts. It takes people and makes them into beasts. In turning to descend the stairs, Lynn slips. She begins to fall, arms uselessly flail. Wordless, over King's outstretched foot she trips, reaching out straining, but to no avail. She plunges down to the solid marble, hitting the floor head first with sudden crack. Pink lips move, but the words are a garble. Save for twitching limbs, her body is slack. Lynn's head lies shattered on expensive rock, yet her chest rises and falls, still breathing. King stands, engulfed in momentary shock. Even watching her die, he's still seething. She's sprawled like a fly in a spider's web, and he just stands there, watching her life ebb. Gripping the railing, King's brain becomes numb, heart racing, but he's outwardly unfazed. He knows he should get help, but just stands dumb as Lynn's open eyes begin to look glazed. Calling for an ambulance now might help. Of all the things that she could be deprived, will now King aid his dear adopted whelp, while there's still a chance that she might be revived? If he were not there, no help would arrive, and that thought grows as soon as it occurs. After all, he often goes for a drive, so he leaves though his conscience deters. Lynn takes over an hour to expire. King's false sorrow on return I admire. Ambulance crew pronounces her deceased. Police ask their perfunctory questions. A heartfelt email announcement released. Well-meaning friends have doubtful suggestions. At last King is finally left alone, but loneliness only increases wrath and drives it deeper, right down to the bone. No, it's revenge that will mark out his path. For a day he despairs without an answer, hid in a strip club, ignoring the view, with eyes more dead than those of the dancer, and in his misery he's left to stew. His anger just takes some time to distill, and he resolves it's Jane he has to kill. Meanwhile, Jane is preparing to abscond. She's just getting her affairs in order, off to America, across the pond, a figurative run for the border. 1 million barely pays for flights and board. In her mind, there's very much more she's owed. She's always considered banking a fraud, and there's a lot more wealth to be bestowed. After all, King is her absent father. She's had a lifetime of stored resentment, so to extort there's no one she'd rather, and the thought brings her almost contentment. In fact, Jane rather hopes to bleed him dry, a pleasurable thought she'd not deny. The thought of Jane unpunished more than galls. Under mounting wrath, King has come unstuck. Her website has an address for in-calls, not her home, but perhaps he'll be in luck. To that address he takes a varied route. Given London's surveillance prevalence, keeping low profile is very astute, wiser than trusting to luck's benevolence. He's discreetly dressed for the incursion, wearing gloves and with shoes wrapped in plastic. The address is a warehouse conversion, and he's resolved to take action drastic. He opens the back door with a stray brick. His method of entry is hardly slick. Upstairs he finds a waiting room of sorts, a chair, a few unlit scented candles, and to give credence to what it purports as some sad clothes and a pair of sandals. Our forensic scientist's the client, receiving his final compensation. Upon him Jane has been so reliant, so he's earned a special degradation. Pushing the inner door, King's hand trembles, worrying now at the last if he should. A dance studio the room resembles, mirrors line the walls, floor of polished wood. But it's by the man that his gaze is caught, as King feels again for the knife he brought. From the ceiling said man is suspended, blindfold earplugs gag, and in latex splayed, hung there his sexual needs attended, out of the gimp suit genitals cascade. Across the hardwood polished floor King creeps, thinking this man's presence might be perfect. Wrath doesn't always burn, sometimes it seeps, but for now a lone door is his object. In the back room he hears Jane preparing, no longer his daughter. That thought is purged, mind flat with resolve, fury unsparing. Beneath rage any mercy is submerged. Trying to keep his breath under control, he fast approaches his murderous goal. Vengeful desire masks grim apprehension. He steps closer to his much-hated prey, chest and throat constricted with the tension, his own flesh and blood daughter to betray. She's naked and oiled for her transaction, back to the door, doesn't see him approach. Another thought begins to gain traction. Through King's mind, a new desire does encroach. There's not much lust in certain acts of rape, wrathful acts, taking what they would not give. You generate fear, give them no escape, and people will do anything to live. King wants to show that he too has power, wants to dominate her and devour. He gets no chance because she hears and turns, both stare in the stillness of that second. Seeing her face, it's for murder King yearns, but Jane moves faster than he had reckoned. King doubles the grip on his purchased blade as he thrusts it forward in a quick stab. With a sharp motion she moves to evade, and both her hands wrap his wrist in a grab. Jane hauls him backward with the knife, grapples, twisting, straining, then she feels the first punch, a blow to the head, her vision dapples, another to the ribs with a dull crunch. Trying to loose the knife, he starts thrashing, in electric light, the knife blade flashing. With Jane's hand still coated in body oil, King manages to pull his knife hand free. Though she frantically tries to recoil, he advances now with an insane glee. The knife to left and right, lethal lashes, slicing at her arms raised in self-defense, with blood streaming from the open gashes. Of mercy there's not the slightest pretense. Jane knows that on these seconds hang her life. To a nearby desk drawer her hand stretches, but she stumbles and King thrusts with the knife, gurgling, scrabbling on the drawer she etches. And dying, she hauls out a revolver, the last emergency problem solver. King sees Jane grab the steel six-barreled threat, and with his free left hand her wrist is seized, close now with thick warm blood. His clothes are wet, holding tight until her struggles have eased. He stands, the knife embedded in her chest, looking around him where she's crimson bled, taking it in though his senses protest, watching till a second daughter is dead. In the main room the man bears no witness, pleasure awaiting, hung deaf, dumb and blind. The King lowers him down and he proves witless, moving as directed from behind. Pushed gently by King to his soon demise, the most ideal patsy he could devise. Our fool scientist slips on the fresh blood. Suddenly his erection seems to wilt, landing on Jane's body with a dull thud, one reaching hand falling on the knife hilt. King finds himself remarkably composed. With scissors he found in Jane's belongings, he stabs down at the man where most exposed. That will put an end to human longings. The man moans and gurgles without much fight. Concerned he's no credible opponent, King pulls off the blindfold, restores his sight. The man stares up for an awful moment. Soon the blood loss extorts his profuse tithe, unconsciousness precludes the reaper's scythe. Now King surveys the potential crime scene. Her flesh bears too many a contusion, and this man isn't sufficiently mean. He needs some way to add more confusion. King sees the room stove, picks up the kettle as he casually clicks on the gas, fills with water, sets it on the metal. He wonders how long to fill the room's mass. He searches Jane's possessions with relief, ready to fly. She was already packed. The search for laptop and backups is brief, and no fear now, they'll be found and hacked. Last he lights candles as if in respect. Murder, theft and arson, time to reflect. For a time, King can afford to exalt. A burning building obfuscates the facts, hides his secrets tighter than any vault. Of course, he needs others to keep their pacts. Jack and Grace might speak of that night's affair, though they've not been told of the family ties. King's been through too much to be laissez-faire. He wants to see what silence money buys. He drives to the restaurant where Jack works, hands unsteady on the wheel of his car, and unsure what to do, just sits and lurks. He didn't mean for things to come this far. Shown to a table seeking contrition, I'm afraid all he'll find is ignition. King just wants some vow of silence sincere, but hope of resolution is fleeting. Jack's anger has become jagged and sheer. It's destined to be a wrathful meeting. Jack asks about wine, but the words are spat from his expression, clearly disgusted, looking down at King like you would a rat who firmly believes Jack can't be trusted. Nevertheless, King does make his appeal, trying to extinguish a burning bridge, but Jack, with a hatred he can't reseal, leans close to King's ear and falls from the ridge. Wrath begets wrath, sure as year follows year, and King now needs to make Jack disappear. King back in his car with fury brimming, he sits waiting, warped conscience on the rack, as the vestiges of daylight are dimming, and later still when night fades into black. Jack emerges into the nearby road, restaurant closed, he's a lone silhouette. All King's caution has had time to erode, there's only one way to make Jack forget. King climbs out the car and grabs an elbow, says emotionless that he wants to talk. Jack can feel the revolver pressed below, shoved towards the car, he's inclined to balk. Jack should know that King is about to snap, still opens the door, climbs into the trap. As Jack crawls inside, King readies his belt, the thick leather held firm in one dry palm. He knows that perhaps something should be felt, but by now he's devoid of moral qualm. Jack has rejected his chance to redeem. The belt drops round his neck, starts to strangle. Unexpecting, he has no time to scream. King haws on the belt, forcing the angle. At the belt and tough hands, Jack tries to claw, but he's pushed hard, face down, held at arm's length, and that noose is pulled firm beneath his jaw as King tightens it with merciless strength. Sight fading now as his throat is crushed. In a few minutes, Jack's protests are hushed. With that, on the back seat lies a dead kid. King searches jean pockets for an address, the body in the footwell vaguely hid. Now his thoughts have had time to coalesce. King climbs behind the wheel, puts it in gear. No second chance for someone to observe, although there wasn't much to see or hear. He pulls away, holding tight to his nerve. Jack's former home was a South London flat, and King heads there now to cover his tracks. A missing person, and that will be that, not a murder, just a case in the stacks. King drives on to make Jack a statistic. Let's see if fortune feels altruistic. Jack's flat is in a cold rental complex. Some gloomy streets away, King's car is parked, all urban decay, dulled by rust flecks. Wearing Jack's hoodie, he goes unremarked. A gate opens at the touch of a fob. The worn keyring still bears the flat number. Straightforward to find and easy to rob. A criminal work while the world's in slumber. It's a small, dirty flat King quickly loathes. Gloved so not to leave any impressions, he stuffs a backpack with assorted clothes and gathers Jack's personal possessions. Then back to his car he quickly hurries, his mind full of a murderer's worries. Once out of London he feels more secure, the repeat glare of motorway amber, a road stretching out with freedom's allure, the relaxed curve of motorway camber. Like most men in his wealthy position, King is a man with a country estate, bought merely for the sake of addition. He never thought it useful till this date. 69 acres to put Jack to rest, with woodland perfect for an unmarked grave, a last resting place that would not be guessed, and one more step in his path left to pave. With heavy lids, King sees his driveway's gate. Driving through it feels like a lifting weight. In his dusty garage, King finds a spade. It's been a long while since he mixed cement, probably the first time in a decade, but it's needed detection to prevent. He finds it soothing digging a deep pit, shoulders aching as the earth starts to pile, his face muddied and clothes full of grit, as if real dirt makes him somehow less vile. A floor of cement goes down as a base, then into the grave he rolls the deposed with a wet slap into a last embrace, and soon in grey cement Jack lies enclosed. Smashed laptops and phones all also buried, strange payment for the sticks to be ferried. King wakes in the morning, brain full of gaps, sprawled on the hall floor, spade still in his clutch. He stands only a few steps from collapse, stumbles to a bench, the spade is a crutch. The door stands open, wind plays in the trees. Here at the house where King planned to retire, he coughs and it develops to a wheeze, an outcome to which we should all aspire. He staggers outside in the growing dawn. His car is there, and back from it he reels, stopped in the middle of the uncut lawn, lights on, flecked with cement, mud on the wheels. He looks to his mansion with its oak beams, then collapses amidst his broken dreams. The car shines, even the wheels are hard scrubbed, but like foam from cleaning, doubts have bubbled. Into every last seam bleach has been rubbed. Nevertheless, King still remains troubled. Within him is a growing compulsion. Desire for finality slowly breeds. Thinking on his actions brings revulsion. He wants to apologize for said deeds. He's unsure what he truthfully intends, but there's only grace left to hear his guilt. Perhaps there's a way to make amends, and then maybe his life can be rebuilt. So he acts against all better reason. Will he commit one last act of treason? King still has Grace's address and drives there, parked outside with rain drumming on the roof. Although he couldn't hurt her, wouldn't dare, he needs some redemption and further proof. He knocks on the door, guilty and afraid. Her parents and siblings out, Grace appears, wearing school uniform, hair in a braid, now confronted with the man of her fears. Emerging out of the rain, pale and gaunt, that memory of hands that grab, thrust that tear, now made flesh, her waking life to haunt, a reminder from a drunken nightmare. Apologies from the lips of a ghoul, falling on Grace's ears, just home from school. With a scream, back inside the house she darts. His foot hits the door before it can slam. Another apology he imparts, but the fleeing Grace doesn't give a damn. She tells him to leave, her voice high and shrill. He tries to explain, his voice is a groan. Grace hides in the kitchen, keeping dead still. Pride drives King to repeatedly atone. For the right words, he continues to search as he advances down the quiet hall. He should have looked for forgiveness in church. Grace moves across the kitchen at a crawl. In some deep corner of King's delusion, he still believes there's a good conclusion. From the floor, Grace reaches for the knife block, blade in hand, behind the door in a crouch. His closer apologies seem to mock, and for her courage even I will vouch. As King enters, she forces down terror, then stabs that kitchen knife into his guts. He sees the magnitude of his error, clutching his stomach where the handle juts. Beyond his grip, Grace manages to pass. Out the back door she continues to fly, into the garden on the lawn's wet grass, running heedless under a stormy sky. From King his soothing delusion is ripped, and the misshapen scales of justice tipped. From tucked in his belt, King pulls out the gun. He needs to talk, explain, make her see sense. Meanwhile, Grace is attempting to run. With panicked hands, she tries to climb the fence. King follows out into the driving rain, gun raised in cruel demand, each step a wrench. He commands her back inside through the pain, but it flares once more and his fingers clench. In suburbia, a gunshot echoes. On Grace's back, a bloody rosette blooms. Then down her spine, a trickle of red flows. For King, for us all, the final act looms. He collapses to the cold, rain-soaked earth and laughs with horror's hysterical mirth. We've come so far, let's take a moment's halt. Do you blame me for all this disaster? Do you believe that somehow I'm at fault? Regretfully, I'm not such a master. Much of what I have said is but vain boast. The dead don't change the world, the living do. I am nothing more than a watching ghost, and not many of my deft words are true. I'll not have it said that they didn't choose. I won't give you all any such excuse. No, there's only one person to accuse. You'll bear the raw guilt for your own misuse. Is that such a concerning confession, that evil isn't at my discretion? No, don't blame devils or some deity. It's with your own sin that you're anointed. So if that thought had brought you gaiety, I'm going to leave you disappointed. For each perverted, child-molesting priest, for the people behind all pointless war, for those who only want their wealth increased, for the heedless to voices that implore. To the self-obsessed millionaire miser, to drug dealers making modern-day slaves, to the foolish who should have been wiser, to those who won't stretch out a hand that saves. Don't blame others to find absolution. For your own sins there's no dissolution. Back to King, sunken alone in the mud. Window-watching neighbors dial the police. Rain pours down as though to effect a flood. His final thought is a desire for peace. Like Osmandius with statue crumbled, look on his works, ye mighty in despair, as all King's schemes to escape have tumbled, to such ancient sinners he can compare. Such a little time and a family found, however we've also watched a family slain. See King slumped with the weight, with his sins crowned, though he'll have but a short time to reign. His mind completes its decomposition, the remainder is just demolition. The result of all King's self-obsessed pride and that vicious, naked, stale ambition will be a miserable suicide, although this is beyond his cognition. Grace lies there, slumped against the garden shed. His once proud face is drained of its vigor. Weeping, he raises the gun to his head. King's final act is to pull the trigger. The cold, lowest circle of hell awaits. It's reserved for those who murder their kin. That is what the justice of God dictates, but my only concern is for my win. Shall I explain the details of my bet? Well, this is as close to the truth as you'll get. Devils gamble with their hopeless inmates. We wager our depth in perdition. Their own sick appetite for sin it sates, and we rarely win the competition. I've won, though, so as a ghost I remain. King takes my place in prison eternal, so one dead man's loss is another's gain. We'll see how he endures the infernal. Does such a deal betray humanity? Doesn't it sound particularly fair? Does this sound like perfect insanity? Well, my friends, I'm afraid I just don't care. With the ringing of his gunshot death knell, it's time for me to bid you all farewell. End of part 3. Thank you for listening to the Sinner's Sonnets, written and read by Giles Mirth.